Prime Big Deal Days are here with 2 days of big savings exclusively for Prime members. You'll feel like a VIP.
Right this way. Your hairdryer deal is waiting.
Sweet. Deals from clothes to electronics. It's on Prime Big Deal Days, October 11th and 12th.
Empire.
Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report. Wherever you get your podcast, you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Empire Media. That's A-M-P-I-R-E. Always much appreciated when you tune in. And don't forget, you can always read my work on ESPN.com. In a couple minutes, I'll be joined by Matthew Paris from the Washington Times and Sam Fortier from the Washington Post as we kind of dig into a lot of the defensive issues. I didn't think it was going to go all defense, but a lot did. And we kind of close on Sam Howell, but a lot of it was what's wrong with the defense? What can they change? Can they change scheme? What can they do to maybe get things turned around? Will they get it turned around? I know what a lot of your confidence is. There's 12 games left. So you got to ask the question, what can they do to do that? And so stay tuned for that in a couple minutes. Couple news items. As you know, Derek Forrest and Jeremy Reeves were placed on injured reserve. They're both injured. Derek Forrest fractured his shoulder, and then Jeremy Reeves partially tore his ACL. Now, the length of their stay is still kind of to be determined. Whether, I know with Forrest, for example, fractured shoulder, that could be a 6-week thing, but I think there's certainly the feeling is that he'll be back at some point. But is it a 4-week stay? Well, it's too early for that. They're still waiting to get results as I talk right now from the bone scan. And so I think that will determine more of how long his stay will be. Maybe by Wednesday afternoon, maybe we have a better idea. But as of now, I would say, certainly clearly at least 4 weeks, because that's how long you have to be on there. But it could be a couple more weeks than that. As far as Reeves go, he's going to get some more medical opinions to determine just, is he done for the year, or is there a chance that he could come back? So I don't want to go anywhere with that just yet because we just don't know. And then with those two guys going on injured reserve, Washington signed from the practice squad linebacker Dejon Harris and safety Terrell Burgess. That's special teams help. I know a lot of people are asking about Jabril Cox. Clearly he's not ready, and just keep in mind that he's on the practice squad. Every other team in the NFL can sign him, and nobody has. And he's also cut by Dallas. So I know a lot of people know the name. I don't know where his progress is at because they have so many other things to wonder about or to ask about that we haven't gotten down there because he's not the savior, folks. So if you're looking for improvement from him for linebacker, if he can do that, it would be more in 2024 if he is indeed that kind of a guy. Anyway, but just letting you know that. And so when they're bringing a guy like Harris up, it's going to be as much for those guys are coming up for special teams. Finally, then you look at the situation. What are they going to do with rookie corner Emanuel Forbes? They benched him during the Bears game. He's had a couple rough games and some other rough moments in other games. Clearly he's a rookie who has to learn. He's been put in some really tough situations for a rookie, covering A.J. Brown, Stephon Diggs, DJ Moore. I mean, those are really good. Those are really good receivers and Devontae Smith in there as well. But, part of what I think they're looking for is the improvement in the technique as much as anything, because that will also then lead to improved play. So what are they going to do with him? Is he going to be their third corner? I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me at all if Danny Johnson plays ahead of him come Sunday in Atlanta, because there's definitely more that they need and want to see from Emanuel Forbes. Stay tuned for that. We'll monitor that one. But it wouldn't shock me at all if Danny Johnson gets the nod ahead of him for Sunday, depending on how Forbes reacts perhaps over the next couple of days in practice. Do they see something different from him in practice that maybe he was working on over the break, or maybe something that settled into him with him? I don't know. And I know that there's a lot of things that rookies always have to learn, but it's something that he definitely has to learn, because right now, and here's the thing, it's not just him. And I know, it always comes across like you're blaming. It's not. This is a guy who's struggling, and are they doing something? And yet the answer is they possibly could. So, the kid still has talent. He's going to need time to grow and develop. This is part of it. So anyway, what everybody always wants to see is, again, you have a bad game, you have a bad week, you have a bad stretch, you have a bad month, whatever. How do you respond to it? And that's going to be the key that determines how much Forbes grows in the future. So anyway, that's it from me. So stay tuned for my conversation with Matthew Paris from the Washington Times and Sam Fortier from the Washington Post. Well, we're missing one guy, but I do have two of my kids back for another episode. I got Sam Fortier from the Washington Post. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can see that he just came back from the skate park. And then we have Matthew Paris from the Washington Times, who is leaving the Times. If I have this right, you're doing your OnlyFans account full time now. Congrats, Matt. I think that's awesome news. And, I do have that right, correct?
In my Major Teddy cosplay. That's
okay.
You guys would be very lucky if everyone hasn't just tuned out already.
Yeah, we're gonna lose
your Teddy cosplay.
Yeah. So anyway, but Matthew is leaving the beat after 6.5 years. Matt, why don't you tell him what you're doing?
Yeah, so I'm moving down to New Orleans to cover the Saints for the Times-Picayune and the Advocate. So one paper down there, and should be quite different, but I'm pretty excited about it. So loved it here, and time to move on.
Time to move on. But it is it's a loss, as we know. This is another loss to our beat reporting colleagues, right. And it's a big loss because Matt's a really good guy and a very hard worker, and we like to make fun of him. And so it's nice to have something like that in the room. So there's only a few of us left.
Well, you have Sam now, so
we still have Sam, but it's not as much fun. Listen, it is fun to rag on Sam, and shout out Sam's mom listening. So, I know she always tunes in, so I appreciate that, but it is fun to have that. But, I feel like for me, we lost Pete, we're losing Matt. I mean, Sam is like you're an only child in the house now,
Right.
Yeah, shout out to Paris's mom, who I always enjoy talking to as well. And I it was funny. We were in the beat room on Monday. Maddie P was on a flight with a special guest, if you want to reveal who that was.
Oh, sure.
Not in the media room, and it was, in terms of the daily beat people, it was just you, me, talking to Kime, you, me, Nikki, and Standig, and it was a weird time, and being on a Zoom with you guys, not Pete, and now we're losing you, and everyone I love leaves me, man. It doesn't feel very good.
Well, I'm still here, so I don't know what that says about what you just said, but it is just for people who know, obviously there's a competition on this beat. Everybody wants to do a good job. Everybody wants to, think that they did this or that. And, I know you guys all look up to me, so I appreciate that. But it is you can get close to people on this beat. I also think with this beat, what we've been through on this beat the last few years, I think it forges a slightly different bond. Do you know what I'm saying? So
yeah. And if you guys want to just, copy my Snyder exclusive after this, you guys go ahead. But it's been nice knowing you.
Thanks for contributing, Matt. But it is, but don't you in all seriousness, let's get the tissues out for a moment here. But it is, it has been, again, you can compete against somebody and still respect them and still like them and still like being around them. And I think it's, whether some people may frown on that, I've always found it to be a healthier way to live, because you still want to compete. I don't think anybody here competes any less because we like one another. Right. But I do think there's been a nice bond in that room, and it makes it a fun place to be.
No, for sure. I mean, you see the competitiveness peak out every once in a while, and when that happens, you just leave that person alone and you try and go about your own competition and trying to get that exclusive or that story done. And when it's time to work, we actually work, but there's a lot of bits in between, which makes it fun.
Yeah.
It's pretty hard for me to turn off the bits, especially with Paris on the Zoom, and be earnest. But just to pull up a text that I got, I want to say it was yesterday or 2 days ago, from Paris. He said, "Why does True Media's snap counts, which use PFF data, differ from the game book? They have Forbes at 193 defensive snaps, and Pro Football Reference / StatHead has him at 201. StatHead uses the totals listed in each game book." And that is an incredibly niche, specific question, but I think it really encapsulates how attentive to the details Paris is, and how hard he works, and how he fact checks and double checks everything to make sure that He's giving good insight, and he's telling you the right thing. And so, just gonna miss getting random texts like that all the time. And I know that he's probably gonna use my True Media account.
I'm probably still going to, so yeah.
But it's that's the sort of thing that, like, in other places I've worked or with other people, it's not a common thing. And I love nerding out over that stuff too. And I'm gonna miss getting texts like that about Washington.
Yeah, and and again, we're going to talk about football in a couple of minutes, so trust me. And we're not going to have this turn into a Matthew Paris beat reporter. I don't know.
We already did that for Pete.
Yeah, some melancholy moment. Like, I don't want to sit here and tear up over Matt Paris, but no offense, man. But it is like, I am curious, Matt, like, because you have spent 6.5 years on this beat. Where do how do you look back? Like, there have been so much that has happened during that time. What would you tell someone in New Orleans about what it was like to cover this beat?
Yeah, I think I captured an interesting time because I think it was the franchise at its lowest point, but right when I started, it wasn't quite that yet. But the next 2 years, I think, really kind of descended it there. 2020 being the most chaotic in terms of not just because of the pandemic, but that's really when that was the year that led to the sale. Basically, everything kind of started then. But, covering an ownership change, a name change, all these things that we thought were just impossible for years. Like, I remember, when I started, all those things were kind of laughed about. We'd always joke about it, but they actually happened. So it was a great experience to be able to cover all that. And, I say this all the time, but you're not just a sports reporter on this beat. You're a law reporter, you're a court reporter, you're pretty much everything. It really made me well-rounded. And I think, honestly, that's why I landed the new job in New Orleans, because I know how to do stuff more than just sports now.
It made you well-rounded. It did not make you speak up a lot, though.
Okay. Yeah,
so let's speak up on on this appearance. But it is true. So, how would where does it, because you're right, like you have to be more than just a sports reporter on this beat. So, well, let me ask you this. Was there a particular story that you covered that you just like, this is the one that's going to jump out? Because, I mean, the sale was the monumental one, right? But anything beyond that, like, where it's just like, I couldn't believe this.
Oh,
the name too.
The name. Yeah. I'll take this a little bit different. And I'll kind of tie it back to the competition aspect to what we have, because I actually think 2020 was really a kind of a foundational year for me and becoming a better reporter, because you just weren't at practice all the time. So you kind of had to do different types of stories. And as Alex Smith's kind of like miraculous comeback was playing out, and we each kind of found our ways to dive into that story, I was really kind of proud of how I tackled that. I did a story where I talked to the screenwriters from Draft Day and the guy who wrote Rudy and all those sorts of things. And like, the great thing about this market is there's so much competition that you're always searching for ways to try and come at it from a different path. So, I think the Alex Smith story, that's an on the field story that I thought kind of stood out. But I mean, there's shit all over the place.
No, absolutely. But I think you're right. Like, this market really makes you better because of that. Anyways, so enough of the maudlin stuff with Matt leaving. So, but do you have something to say, Sam?
I just want to say that I checked True Media actually just now, and Paris's retirement tour is about 450 Instagram stories and 78 tweets short of Pete Haley's.
I was gonna say, like, yeah, Pete Haley set a record there with that one. I don't know. It was like, I don't know any, like, it was like it was like he was Michael Jordan leaving the NBA, for God's sake.
Well, I've made this joke in the room, but I'll do it for your listeners. I am Paul Pierce from the Clippers bench saying you thought you was Draymond Green yelling, "They thought you was Kobe," to Paul Pierce at the free throw line, because that was it's Kobe, it's Pete, and I'm Paul Pierce getting a sad retirement tour. So there you go.
There you go. Anyways, before you leave, you do have a little bit more football to talk here, and so, the serious topic is the Commanders are 2-3, and where are things headed, and et cetera, et cetera. But first, let's start, like, Sam, we had a chance to talk to, and Matt, obviously you would have listened in or knew what Ron Rivera said. Did anything jump out to you about what he said on Monday after they had the chance on the weekend to kind of reflect on their mistakes or whatever?
Basically, his decision to say that the defense is the byproduct, the explosive plays are the byproduct of a lot of different things. Inexperience, it's a lot of coverages, it's a lot of mistakes, and there's really no one culprit. And the decision to stay with Jack Del Rio and the defensive staff and all the front office people, like, rather than like what he said, just with his words, I think his actions really illustrated to me that he's going to bet on his guys going forward. And I know you and Nikki talked about like why it's more complicated to move on from people than they expect, but just coming out of the weekend and saying, yeah, I mean, we're going to have a shorter leash on guys like Emanuel Forbes. We're not going to tolerate growing pains as much. But to me, the most significant thing is they made no changes and they're going to bet their jobs on basically improving what they have with what they have.
Yeah. And I mean, they've done that in the past. I think it's worked out for them with it. So I understand them going that route. But I think the thing I took from Monday's press conference was either the things he didn't say or the things he tried to clumsily explain. I texted a few of you guys of trying to understand what Ron was talking about when Ben asked about the free agency class and the rookie class. He gave a very strange answer, kind of saying it was on Sam Howell. I don't think he necessarily meant it, but I think the things covering Ron, especially the last few years, is when he gets himself into trouble, he just kind of is searching for an answer, and those words don't always make a lot of sense. And I think it's misinterpreted. I think sometimes, I don't know if he views media as an obligation that he just has to do when he's trying to get through the 10 minutes or whatever, but it's stuff like that, especially when things don't go well. It's very confusing. And I don't think that look, he's not going to be able to say anything short of like, I'm firing Jack Del Rio that'll make fans happy. But I think in times like this, people are looking for satisfying answers, and he didn't provide many of them in his latest press conference anyway.
He's also someone, you talk about satisfying answers. I think there's also that sentiment. Should he be showing more emotion, like on the sidelines or things like that?
I don't get that. I mean,
yeah,
personally, that's just not, I mean, he can show no emotion and they can win 15 games and I think fans would be happy. I get it. I mean, I guess the halftime thing that's been a radio topic here this week is a little different, but even then, I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with letting your players sort it out in a situation like that. I mean, they're the ones performing on the field. I think a lot is made of Rivera's emotions on the sideline.
Correct.
A little bit more than there needs to be honest.
And I think, like, I can't remember who said this to me. It was someone in the Chargers locker room, maybe Phillip Rivers, maybe Antonio Gates when I was there. But they said, like, players can tell when you're forcing something or when you're not being yourself. And I think that you have to be genuine. So if you're Ron Rivera and you're not fired up on the sideline, or you think that, hey, like, the best way to do this is not address the team, I mean, the owner can make the decision, hey, is this coach making the right decision in how he addresses this team? But if the coach is doing what he feels is necessary and, over, Ron's nearly 200 career games, that's what he's decided to do. Like, I don't know. I think it's more of a radio topic than it is like an actual topic in the locker room.
I agree with that. And the other thing to keep in mind, like, they actually did play well in the second half up until the last 5-6 minutes of that game. So whatever happened in the locker room at halftime, it was a better result than the opening, whatever they did in the locker room before the game. So, until the last few minutes when it just kind of got away from them. But so, yeah, I tend to agree with that. And it's funny because I've heard in other sports of coaches doing that. I don't know how prevalent it is, but I've heard of others doing it. So I just don't think it needs to be given a lot of oxygen with us. So, but like, speaking of changes though, so we know they're not doing any coaching changes, et cetera. Are there other changes that you think they could do this and it might help?
Well, not necessarily in the spirit of this question, but one of the things we didn't mention off the press conference is Derek Forrest is going on.
I was just I wanted to ask, yeah, and he and Jeremy Reeves. So yeah, let's go there first and the impact of that, because like it could be a decent stay for Forrest, and Jeremy, they're still finding out about the knee as to how long it will be for him. But what about that impact?
I think it's a huge impact, because even though Derek Forrest, I don't think was having his best year, particularly in terms of missed tackles, like he played 99% of the snaps. You had a certain trust that he knew what he was doing, his third year in the system. And Cam Curl trusts him a lot. And now you're going to have a younger guy in Percy Butler, and you're going to have a guy in Quan Martin, who has not played a defensive snap this year and really, has had trouble getting onto the field, had the concussion in week 1. And as Percy Butler said, guys, those versatile defensive backs are good in theory, but asking them to play and rotate as much as they would like to early on in your first year, like that's very difficult. Percy Butler in camp was telling us, like, I couldn't play fast because I was just having to say, okay, what is my assignment? What personnel are they in? What are they doing in motion? How does that change my responsibility? And so this is going to be a huge challenge for Quan Martin. And they're tied for 7th, I believe, right now in terms of 37 explosive plays allowed. And a lot of those have been on the defensive backfield, either, Percy Butler turning the wrong way in cover 2 on that first touchdown for the Bears. I mean, the defensive backfield is struggling, and now they have to put in someone who I think is going to have a very challenging time. And so if you're looking for a bounce back from the defense, Jack Del Rio's got his work cut out for him.
Right. And I think for me is just sorry, were you going to say something?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think related to your first question, Kym, of what changes they can make, I think the thing I'm most interested to see what they do, at least with the defense, is how much do they stick with the 3 safeties now, trying to give Quan that responsibility, or do they just stick with Benjamin St-Juste on the outside, Kendall Fuller, and then have Danny Johnson be in the slot, or do they keep Benjamin St-Juste in the slot and have Danny Johnson play the outside? Danny Johnson was the guy on my flight, by the way, to tie this back even earlier to where Sam was. He was coming back from
that also assumes that they're going to keep Emanuel Forbes on the bench, and I don't know that that's the case.
Sure. Yeah, no, I mean, I would imagine at least 6 for a game. Now, I don't have that source. Maybe kind of you would know better than I would, but it is. I think they're at least going to give this a shot as to see how it looks if the defense plays a lot better with Johnson. Maybe if Johnson struggles, they go back to Forbes. But yeah, because I mean, Danny Johnson didn't have the best game. Even
he could have given up a touchdown pass too if the pass is better. So everybody in that secondary has struggled, which has been the surprise to me. But I do think you bring up a good point. What is the impact on the 3 safety packages? And Sam too, I also wonder, are they sometimes, like, there's such a big emphasis here on the position versatility, that have they gone overboard in trying to attain that?
This is the discussion we've had with the offensive line, right? Like you need, and when you whiff on, what was it, 3 in a row, like tackles that became guards, like at some point you need a guy who plays one position well, and they have not prioritized that. Even going back to, they didn't draft Kyle Hamilton, obviously, and they drafted Jahan Dotson, but like you need a guy that can play safety well, or you need a guy that can play the slot well, and they don't have that, especially. And I think like the bigger predicament for them right now is not even, hey, can this guy play multiple positions? It's getting them online fast enough, but like teaching them all the responsibilities you want them to handle. And so, like, even if you do have that position flex, you're building in, like a Percy Butler, almost a year of where they can learn and then, kind of get into the flow. Now with Quan Martin, if you had just drafted a slot, like, okay, maybe, he picks it up pretty fast, but now you have to teach a guy multiple roles. It just lengthens the time you have to coach them, and it also like makes the barrier of entry higher. And so, I mean, that's just it. It's a big risk,
It is. And the other thing I wondered too about with change, because you go over the personnel, and there's, I don't know that there's a magic elixir that you can say, okay, this guy can come in and do this. So then you look at scheme, or you look at strategy. Defensively, we'll stay there for now, but is there any tweak with the scheme? Were they playing too much man the last 2 weeks? And I know some of it's related to RPO stuff, et cetera, but is that something that you say, that you go back to, like, just maybe play more zone? Would that help? Can they do something like that? And how much would that help?
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine it would. I don't know the numbers of the percentages of how often they've been in man versus zone this year, but I mean, that Tevin Jenkins quote that kind of circulated after the game, it certainly appeared that Washington was at least presenting man before switching to zone kind of after the snap, and the safeties weren't reacting fast enough to get back in their zones. And that's why Chicago was able to kind of find the holes that they did. So I do think maybe they just have to be more sound fundamentally. I think in terms of scheme too, I think an interesting point that Rivera brought up was trying to find that line of how much do we need to allow guys to go with the techniques they're comfortable with versus the techniques they're trying to teach. I think going back to the Emanuel discussion, that maybe suits him especially, because when Rivera said that the techniques that they had him running in training camp, he looked a lot better. Maybe he's just reverting back to some old habits. But I think those types of things is, how much man zone do they want to deploy? Because their zone is kind of like a man anyway, at least with the match patterns. And then the techniques of what these guys are running and how they cover guys, I think matters a lot too.
And I will say, like, they did play a lot more man against Chicago, and I think Justin Fields talked about that, and he struggled against zone coverages in the first 4 games. But I don't, it's funny because in watching, like I saw what Jenkins said, and then in watching it, wasn't quite sure it always matched up to that, because some of the issues, I think they're in the right spot. They just bid on some action on a play, or they were late rotating, whatever it was. But that's how they thought about it. So anyway, Sam, what do you think?
Did they play too much man discussion is kind of interesting to me, because I went back and looked at all 37 of the explosive plays they've allowed. They've allowed explosives in cover 1, cover 2, cover 3, cover 4. They've allowed it,
it's been everything.
It's been on multiple players, like the first one in Chicago was Benjamin St. Juste biting on a double move. There's been plenty of double moves bid on by Emanuel Forbes. I mean, cover 2, the first touchdown they had, Percy Butler, as I said, turns the wrong way. Like, that's a zone coverage. He just blows it.
It's basic,
I don't think playing more zone is going to magically fix the problems that they have.
But I will say I think you're absolutely right that it hasn't just been man, but a lot of the big plays the last 2 games have come in a man coverage. And so that's where I wonder, can they help them? But the problem is, you're right. Like if the safeties aren't looking in the right spot in a cover 2, and now you're losing one of your experienced guys back, or, younger, but experienced guys back there, what can you do? But that's the only thing I wonder.
Yeah, no, and I think there is credence to, did they play too much man? But I think that people who are saying they need to play more zone, this is like a cure-all silver bullet. Like, I think that's misguided.
Agree.
And so, but I think for me, like, this defense is probably at its best, kind of like they were last year, where they play a lot of too deep, too high stuff. And, they force teams to sustain drives. They don't allow explosive plays. Like, kind of like how the Bills do it in terms of forcing teams to drive down the field. And I know that to me, like, when I go back and I watch all of those explosive plays and you see it happening all the time, like, and I know that Ron, when I asked him about it, didn't totally agree with this, but I mean, the theory for me is that it's possible that Jack has spent so much of the offseason and preseason and regular season preaching, we need to take the ball away more, that guys are playing more aggressive and they're allowing it to lead to over-aggression, like the Forbes and BSJ, trying to jump routes. He said that, Ron said he wasn't mad at the Kendall Fuller one that he came down on for the DJ Moore play.
That was a perfectly thrown ball.
Right. I agree with that. But I'm saying, I think in general, I think there's just watching them on tape, like it just feels sometimes like they're a little bit over aggressive. And I wonder why that is, particularly for a guy like Benjamin, who normally, is very aware of his help and where, what schemes they're in. So I know that like, to me, that just seems like a thing that stuck out, and I don't have, an objective data point to prove it, but it feels like it when I watch them. And so I think that could be a part of it as well.
Could be. And they're certainly, I mean, every year the coaches emphasize turnovers, but because it was a bigger one in media discussions with Rivera during press conferences of the offseason, that's why they drafted Forbes. So go ahead.
Every defensive player that we talked to said, we need to start fast and generate turnovers. And I know that coaches always want to generate turnovers, but and they haven't started fast. So maybe they're not always listening to their coaches for sure. But I just think, I don't know. I think it's possible.
Do you think we were just completely fooled by because like going into the season, now listen, we saw they played well the last half of the year last year. The numbers were good, and the numbers don't always tell everything, but it's not like they had top 10 numbers, but we're a bottom third defense. So they were a good defense at the end of the year. And then this summer, did we get fooled by it? What did we miss this summer that is playing out?
I mean, a part of this, I think, is that NFL defense is inherently more volatile than offense. I think you have to always build in that variance, but also I mean, it's always been the case in Washington, right? You look at the collection of talent that they have and you think like, this must be better. And Forbes made sense because they needed to generate more turnovers and they had experienced guys in the fourth year of the system and the second year of the match zone coverage. Like everything suggested that this team could be a top 10 defense. I don't think that was a ridiculous discussion to have.
No. And Chase Young looked good when he was healthy early in camp.
And
I think he still looks good.
He doesn't. He's not.
He was maybe their best player in Chicago. It was Eric.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, did we get fooled? Like, possible. I mean, it's some of this, like some of the, especially the slow start stuff. Like, sometimes it's hard to come up with a rationale of exactly why it's happening because it's sometimes you look at it and you're like, this should not happen.
Right. And that's why like some of the mistakes are just like, I can't believe this guy did that because he doesn't usually. What do you think, Matt?
Well, the slow starts for me are really hard to parse too because you look at the first game, I would say the defense started fast. They didn't allow a touchdown. They allowed Arizona to try and go down, but they still made their impression on the game. Denver, they started slow in the first half, but I would say the reason Washington got back into that game is because the defense really cracked down, kind of kicked Denver's ass, and the defense had 7 sacks. I really think they turned that game around because the defense played up to its standards. And then even in the Buffalo game, Buffalo only had 16 points for so long.
3 quarters.
And so I really kind of think you can make an argument that they did start fast, at least partially through some of the 3 weeks. I wouldn't necessarily say I agree with it. Sam, you're making a face.
Well, Matt has just put them as the best defense in the NFL, but
right.
No, but in fairness, like even in the Eagles game, it was several plays. Now those plays happened, and the guy on their defense allowed them to happen. But in general, like they stopped DeAndre Swift. There's some good things. However, collectively, they're not getting it done, and but that's the problem. So do you think that they can turn it around like they did last year?
I kind of do. I mean, we'll see how it goes. Maybe maybe the offense gets a little worse or stuff like that, and the defense plays higher to the standards. I mean, I guess it's just more so with like the explosives. I mean, this defense though has shown that they do a better job of cracking down on the explosives as the season goes along, and I think the explosives are the number one thing right now that's killing them. Now, I don't know if they'll be as solid on third down, whether they'll drastically improve there. I think they have the 13th highest conversion percentage right now at 41%. At least they did going into the weekend. So, that was a thing that separated them last year. Why they were an awesome defense is because they had the best third down defense in football. Right. And so, Sam, I know you wrote this in your article the other day of it flipped in 20 and 22, and maybe it didn't flip in 21. But if you remember in that 21 season, there was that 4-game winning streak where the defense was playing in kind of a top 10 fashion again. Maybe you see something like that where it bounces back for a little bit, but then they don't maintain it for the whole season.
To Paris's point, and thanks for reading the other day. But Jack Del Rio, like if you were in Vegas, I think that the bet would be like they would be favored to go on a run like the defense at some point during this year because Jack Del Rio. Like we're watching the same movie over again. Like it's Apollo, it's like, it's the same thing. They're going to go on a run at some point, and obviously like facing worse quarterbacks would help. I think they're going to do that. With Desmond Ridder and whether Daniel Jones is back or not. And so I think that it's a good bet that they're going to, but how long can they sustain it? Can they sustain it like they did in 20 and 22? Or is it like 21 where they fall off and ultimately, and the other thing I would say is the thing that's different about this year is that they're actually subtracting someone in Derek Forrest who wasn't hurting them as much as players in past seasons. If you remember, like in week 6 in 2021, they moved Landon Collins from safety to linebacker, or downhill attacking style player, or whatever they said. And then in 2022, they benched William Jackson after 4 games, and they said, okay, like we're going. So Jack Del Rio doesn't have a chess move to make like that. He's actually being forced to do it by an injury now. So can he still bounce back in the same way?
Well, sorry, just to jump in real quick. Is Emanuel Forbes that move? I mean, if you want to make
I don't think so.
If you're benching your first round pick, I think that's a way bigger concern.
No, I mean it is.
I also wonder
they did it.
Right, but I don't know that the problem is like you had some options to go at corner that were more solid, and I don't know that will Danny Johnson be that kind of elixir for them, but
he did.
So I don't know. I also wonder, this is where I wonder if you go to more zone match, would that be better for Forbes? I don't, if you're getting away from that, will that help him? I don't know.
Two components here. One is that I think watching Emanuel Forbes try to balance, hey, don't get beat deep, but also be the ball hawk you were drafted to be, is going to be one of the most fascinating storylines of the next 4 weeks, because they drafted him to create turnovers, and now that he's taking shots and trying to create turnovers, they, obviously,
I think he can still be aggressive, but he's got to. I think the problem is the technique has been very inconsistent, and the details of his game have been inconsistent.
And the second one,
he can improve there,
right? And the second thing that I had is that Danny Johnson is the people's champion. I know that Ben Standig, that's his guy, but not only was he on Matt's flight, he sat in the middle row,
right,
which is incredible to me. And if you remember last year when they benched Christian Holmes in New York for the game they tied, Danny Johnson had a huge blitz off the edge to get a sack to push them out of field goal range, and he had like 3 passes defensed basically to help them tie that game. And so, well, I don't think he's the long-term solution by any means. Danny Johnson can ball at points.
Definitely, he can definitely ball, but is he that kind of now it could just be the plays you don't give up are what they need right now, right? Whether how many plays you make, but as long as you're not giving up these big 25 plus plays, that's where they've been killed. So that's the question. And if he can do that, get him out there, but I still think Forbes is going to be heard from at some point because he's your first round pick. They're not going to let him just sit there, I don't think. So, hey, we got about a couple minutes left here. Let's switch real quickly to offense. Sam Howell, has he surprised? Has he done what you thought? What have your quick early impressions of what he's done through 5 games?
The accuracy,
where he's going.
The accuracy to me has been the most surprising part of this. I think he's looked pretty great in that regard. I know this system helps him out a lot with that, but I think if you're looking at him to be a viable solution for the long term, I kind of think that the poise are maybe the 2 biggest strengths that he has. But the biggest concern for the rest of the season is going to be the sacks. I mean,
right.
If you told me that they would break the record for most sacks in a season by a quarterback, I would kind of bet right now that he sets the record. I mean, I don't really see this improving for the rest of the season, at least for that.
I worry about him holding up to be able to get a chance to break that record. What do you think, Sam?
That's exactly what I was about to say, because I mean, there's a lot of things that have not been surprising, right? The mobility, the arm strength, his ability to hunt and execute like baller throws, or to get out of the pocket and move the chains on 3rd down with his legs, and taking all the sacks. We knew that was a thing with him back to North Carolina, getting the ball out on time, learning a new system with rhythm and timing and spacing. I think that we haven't been overly surprised, except maybe with the accuracy, particularly on the move. But will he hold up? Because not only does he lead the league in sacks, he leads the league in quarterback hits, 50. And the record for hits in a season is only 131, which was set by Kirk Cousins last year. And so Sam Howell's not getting the ball out like that. And he's not even, I think, as big and durable as Kirk is. And so you just see some of those screens or some of those, plays where he's getting the ball out even quickly, he's still taking a lot of damage, and he's not a huge guy. And so I think it's a real big concern. And Charles Leno said he was concerned about just Sam's ability to hold up.
And he certainly advocated for them not keeping him in at the end of those blowout games and taking more hits, which I think at some point you absolutely have to think about that. But the other thing is along those lines is, and the last thing I'll say on this is, he runs like a linebacker. So he had that 3rd down and 10 in the red zone. He's trying to pick up those extra half yards by going through 3 guys. That's where it's I love the mindset, but man, that can get you in trouble. Anyways, listen, that's all. We're going to run out of time here in a minute. So I do want to say thanks for coming on, Matt. It's been a pleasure watching you grow and develop as a reporter. We're going to miss you. Sam, it's always fun to watch a young reporter grow, develop, and get better. Sam, good luck, because there's still time. So don't worry about that. Shout out Mrs. Fortier. Your son's doing a good job. But it is, like, seriously, like, it's been a pleasure, Matt. And so we will miss you. And, you can come back and visit and stay in your old bedroom when you can.
Right.
So
I don't think the occupants will be too happy. So
I said too many nice things about Matty P earlier, so I'm just gonna be like, get lost, man.
All right. There you go. Thanks, guys. That's it for this episode. Thanks to Sam and Matt for joining me. And thank you, as always, for tuning in. I'll be back on Friday afternoon, Saturday morning, with my keys and a prediction for the Commanders game at the Atlanta Falcons. Big one, folks. Got to get it. Got no choice, because you can't let this season get away so early. Talk to you next time.